Hello, this is solving system of equations by elimination, easier questions. And this is a story problem, so the story problems are never easy, but they are very important, and with two equations in two unknowns, you can usually come up with equations and get the relationships down much easier than when you're only limited to one equation. This problem has to do with the National Hockey League. They have a complicated system for keeping track of wins and losses. It's 2 points for each win, and you could get no points for a loss if you lost during regulation, and during regulation means there was no overtime play. But if you lose in overtime, you get 1 point. It sounds strange, but it's not really. The only thing that's strange is sometimes 3 points are given for a game, and other times just 2. But if there is an overtime, that means you played to a tie, and you're guaranteed 1 point for that tie. And then if it does go into overtime, then if you win in overtime, you still get your 2 points for your win. And the reason the league did this, it wasn't always like this. Very often they used to play to a tie. And that's because hockey, being a pretty low-scoring game in general, very often just 2 to 4 or 6 points are scored. That many goals are scored in a game, and there were too many ties. And the National Hockey League has made a lot of changes to their game to make the game more exciting. Just recently they eliminated the two-line pass, which used to stop the action, and now they made that legal, and it's made the game more exciting. Every year they take steps to keep their game very exciting, and it is a very exciting game. So anyway, in hockey, a win gets you 2 points. If you lose in regulation, that's no points. But if you lose in overtime, that's 1 point. And the rest of the question has to do with the Los Angeles Kings. They played 82 games. They lost 35 in regulation. Their total points were 89. And the question they want us to answer is, how many wins did they have, and how many overtime losses did they have? So there's really 3 possibilities altogether for a game in hockey as far as your team is concerned. If you win it, that's one possibility. You could lose it in regulation, that's a second possibility, and the third possibility is that you lose it in overtime. And gee, looking at all this information, you may think, well, where the heck can I start with all of this information? I've got all this stuff. Look at this. Different numbers all over the place. Where do I start? And I appreciate your concern. It's tough. I'm going to start down here. Wins and losses. I'm going to call the wins X. The overtime losses Y. I don't need the losses in regulation because I know what that is. These are the 3 different things. Now altogether they played 82 games. Either the game was a win, it was a loss in regulation, or it was an overtime. So if I take the number of games they won, the number of games they lost in regulation, add it to the number of games that they lost in overtime, altogether that has to add up to the 82 games. So the number of wins is X, the number of lost in regulation is 35, and the overtime losses is Y. So let's add those 3 things up and get their 82 games. So I'll take their wins, which I just said that I'm going to call that X. Their wins. Add it to their overtime losses, and add the third thing, which is their 35 lost in regulation, and all that, those three things add up to the number of games that they played, 82. Okay, now let's try dealing with these points. Each win gets 2 points. So X is the number of wins. So if it's 1, it's times 2. If it's 2, it's times 2. If they won 3, they would get 6 points for that. It's always times 2. So the number of points they get for their wins is 2 for each of them. So that's 2 times X. The lost in regulation, they don't get any points for that. So I don't have to do anything with the 35. If you felt like it, you could do 35 times 0, but that's 0. So this really doesn't enter the equation, not really. What does enter the equation are these overtime losses, because these overtime losses means they played in regulation to a tie, and they get 1 point for that. Their overtime losses is 1, so it's going to be 1 times y, which is y. So I'll just add this. They got 2 points for each one of these, 1 point for each one of those, and altogether during this season that they're talking about, their total points was 89. So I've got my 2 equations. Okay, I've got my wins. Y was my overtime losses, and now there's my 2 equations. Now this first equation is kind of sloppy. It's got this 35 here. This looks nice. This looks like the ones we usually deal with. 2x plus y equals 89. This one, if I minus 35 to both sides, it'll make it look more like the equations that I'm used to. So I'll minus 35 to both sides, and I end up with x plus y equals 47. 82 take away 35 is 47. Now I'm ready to solve this system of equations by elimination. And elimination, also called by adding or subtracting, and I do it by adding or subtracting the equations. If I start out with 2 simple equations like this, I could add them up to get 7 equals 7, another true equation, or I could subtract them and get 1 equals 1, another true equation. I don't usually do this, but this equation, these 2 equations, look like they are just ready for subtraction. And it's not confusing at all. Usually subtraction is so confusing that I would rather multiply one of the equations by -1 and then add. It doesn't allow me to make mistakes that way. But this one looks like it's all set up. 2x take away x is just x. Y take away y is 0. 89 take away 47 is 42. So x is the wins, so I just figured out that they have 42 wins. Now x plus y has got to equal 47. So if I substitute a 42 for x into this equation, that would be, instead of an x, I'm going to write 42 plus y equals 47. Now if you think about this, so y is a number that when I add it to 42 I get 47, and that number has to be 5. And if you minus 42 to both sides, 47 take away 42 is 5, so y equals 5. So, and that's my overtime losses. So let's see if everything is fine here. So the wins is 42. So that means and now I'm adding up the games. So there were 42 games in which they won. There were 5 that they lost in overtime, and then there were 35 other games that they lost in regulation. So if I add this up, I get 82. And it said that they played 82 games. So that part of it checks. And now let's check their points. These 42 were wins, so that's 84 points that they got for their wins. And they got 1 point apiece for these overtime losses. And that's 89, and that's their total points. It said that their total points is 89. So I've solved it correctly. The Kings that season had 42 wins and 5 losses in overtime.